right. Happy good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, wherever you are joining us from in the world. My name is Devin Montgomery Pasha, and I'm honored to be moderating another fantastic event brought to you by Eventcombo. So speakers are joining us today for a conversation about why event teams need one source of truth. But let's make it interactive and make sure you drop your questions in. To begin with, let's see where you are joining us from. So if you are here and joining us and excited, please let us know your name and where you're joining us from in the world. We have an international guest list today. So we're going to get going. And today we're talking about something that we think quietly impacts almost every event or event team, not for the design, not for the content, but how fragmented systems and disconnected data is sort of like a quiet killer and maybe something we're not aware of. So what you're going to find today is this system is not just about systems conversations, it's about a trust and decision-making conversation. So with that teed up, I am beyond delighted to introduce you to this fantastic international powerhouse panel of speakers. First up, we have the one and only MJ Brode, who is actually joining us from the future in Adelaide, Australia. It's officially Thursday morning, so she's a bright outlook on the future. MJ is the CEO of Atlas Events Group. She brings a full 360 view of event operations, from registration and automation to data strategy and customer journey design. Welcome, MJ.
Hi, thanks for having me again.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to have you on one of our webinars. Next up, we have Keith Johnson. He's the managing partner at i3 Events and co-founder of Event Tech Atlas, where he focuses on simplifying tech stacks and helping teams build a true single source of truth. Everyone welcome Keith Johnson.
Good to be here.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, we have the one and only Debbie Garcia, founder and CEO of Visitor, combining sourcing, strategy, and technology to help planners and suppliers work smarter, faster, and with even more connection. Debbie, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you for having me.
So to get us started and help us understand your positions, I told you all I was going to have a question for you when we were backstage. And I really want to get an idea of, where your thoughts are, where your position, how you think this affects. So I'm going to go around the horn. Keith, I'm going to start with you. What is one operational challenge you've seen caused by fragmented systems?
The biggest one, there's actually two. The first one is in a run of show situation, right, with fragmented systems. And, we were doing a huge event one time. Everyone was on. The run of show was in Excel. It wasn't in something that updated in real time. So everyone at the table was using the most up-to-date except for the lighting guy, because he doesn't check his email very often. So he didn't get the latest one. The second operational challenge is it's those in-between moments, right? System A and System B work great. The registration in the app, and moving data when they're not connected is easy. Download a CSV, upload a CSV. But what happens is in that final week before an event, we actually had one client that before we came in, they were so busy that in that last week, when they were getting oodles of registrations, they ended up with 200 people who had to wait to get in the app because no one had the time to download and then re-upload them into the app, right? And so those are some of the operational challenges that you see on a daily basis if your data doesn't talk.
Awesome. Thanks, Keith, for breaking that down. I know all too well the not live part. It's like, no, that's 3 versions ago.
Yeah.
Not live.
Final, V22, final.
With titles like this, but you missed the last V because it gets cut off. Man, we've all been there. All right, MJ, what is one operational challenge you've seen caused by fragmented systems?
I think the biggest operational challenge I've seen is the lack of measurability. So I feel that with the fragmented systems, it creates reporting gaps because of the way that they don't interact with each other or potentially aren't built to actually utilize the data. So, as an events professional, I think we find ourselves constantly trying to retrofit the data we have into the systems we have, but then at the same time, potentially we're not actually optimizing that data because the system actually can't do anything with it anyway. And I always find that really frustrating. So, your sales team aren't necessarily finding out all the things that they can about their leads and their contacts, or the marketing team isn't finding all the data points that the campaign's actually having because it's not being tracked correctly, or there's just no infrastructure in place to be able to do it. So yeah, that lack of measurability is huge.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that and where that actually has a lot of hidden problems that can cause a lot of gaps. And, I know we were talking about how everyone says events don't work anymore. We're like, no, they actually do. But great anecdote to show how they're doing it. Debbie, I am coming over to you and your dog who want to join us. So, Debbie, I'm going to start with you and ask you one operational challenge you've seen caused by fragmented systems.
Well, I take it from the beginning of the event. I think, for sourcing, we are completely disjointed. I think from when we start an event, that is the main foundation. So when you are you don't know what your stakeholders want, you have not done the why before you buy, you didn't look at your budget, and you're just spitting out RFPs all across the board board is kind of where things get started. And also most of the systems right now that are out there operationally are for hotel sourcing. I don't source hotels. I source events, and being able to go to one place that you can see all of it as a whole and see your request for proposals and contracts go back. I think that is just one of those operational things that has been overlooked for so many years that we don't think about things as events anymore. We think about it as hotel sourcing.
Absolutely. And you said sourcing, and of course, as I would say, a recovering event professional, recovering event planner, I will always be in the industry. It is those things that we think about. I'm listening to all of you and I'm writing these notes, and I think I'm having PTSD trauma from these moments, because it's like, oh my God, that was such a problem. And oh my God, that really ruined something. And the lighting guy missed 3 cues, and the CEO is staring daggers down the AV table. And then you hear at the end, this was too hard. This didn't work. This didn't match. But really what I hope you're all going to share with us is how to reduce those frustrations, how to solve some of those aches. And we're going to start with this idea of when something breaks. And it goes back to this idea of, we hear so often, well, in-person events don't work, virtual events don't work. But where are we looking at the performance break? Where are we looking at where something that we have a choice over or education about can actually keep that from breaking? So Debbie, I want to start with you, thinking about leadership and impact. How does these misalignments impact leadership decisions?
Well, first of all, I think that a lot of times that event professionals are brought in at the wrong time, that a lot of decisions are made without them. So we're kind of information takers instead of information leaders, where if we can be in that room right before we decide on, we're having a conference and we want this many people and this is where we want it, maybe have the event professional in the room at the time to give the pros and cons and be communicative instead of bringing them in later and dictating to them what they want. We are professionals, just like a plumber, just like an electrician. Some of us have, little fancy things after our name that we went to more schooling. And I do think that at the end of the day, that if we're looked at as professionals and brought in the conversation earlier and understanding the stakeholder needs, that we can actually get off to a better start earlier. And then communication. I think that, we all say we're communicating, but we're not. For example, working with a client right now that has tons of information, but no structure and no way to kind of understand what she's looking for. And they're combative conversations instead of being able to come together and understand what her needs are from my perspective to execute.
Absolutely. And what an interesting point about being information takers and not leaders. I know a terminology we've used in the past is sometimes as event professionals, we're seen as order takers instead of strategic advisors. I used to teach my young events professionals, with the Steno pad, and would you like fries with that, when they're taking that dictation. And what you're right, it's we're not using information. We're doing what they think is best based off of a single perspective, but we're not having a two-way open communication. MJ, you were kind enough to share a story with me earlier that I think really highlights this idea about where leadership is having an impact, where it's having an impact on decisions, where it's having an impact on really showing broken performance in this disjointed communicationless way. Would you be kind enough to share that with us so we can kind of see this as a holistic picture, but in a real life scenario?
Not throwing you under the bus or anything. Yeah, I won't name this particular platform, but if you've used it, you'll know it straight away. But yeah, I find exactly to Debbie's point, when we're not brought in on a strategic level and we become, I call us executioners, we're basically just executing, or we're reactive is another way that people put it. We're just constantly reactive. We're not being proactive. And being proactive is being part of the strategy conversation. So exactly what Debbie was saying. One of the roles I found myself in, I was the order taker. I was only executing the events that they thought they wanted. And there was literally no way to measure the ROI because the program that they used, the marketing license is separate to the sales license. So unless do you know who I'm talking about yet? Drop it in the chat if you know who I'm talking about. So therefore, if you're in the marketing team, you can't see what's going on with the sales pipeline. And so there was absolutely no way for me to measure ROI without a sales chair. And the company was unable to purchase me a sales chair, unwilling, whatever you want to call it. And so as a result, I was never really able to show ROI, follow up what was happening with the leads that were coming to our events, being able to be proactive and strategic and looking at ways we could re-engage those attendees. There's so much that can be done with good data, which I was getting from the registration side. We were capturing amazing ICP information for the client, but there was literally nowhere for it to live. So what I did was a great Excel spreadsheet, CSV files, saved all the data for them. And then one day when they got the right people on board, I was like, Merry Christmas. Here's 80 events worth of data. Go hard. And then I departed. So, I still left them with everything that they needed. And I actually made it. What's the word I'm looking for? It wasn't retrofitting, which is what I was doing. I was actually like future-proofed it.
Yeah.
Yes,
and made
absolutely.
use the right data in the future. I actually even had the columns with the fields, like this is how you should be mapping it into the sales side, whenever that wants to happen. So fragmented systems are definitely not ideal. Not ideal.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Yeah, because you're talking about also measuring performance. It's like I can't measure that performance, which is so integrated into this performance. And I think, when we're talking about data sets, a lot of us look at that quantifiable data set, how many people registered, how many came, how many went through here. But if that's not what we need to be measuring, we're missing that qualitative side. We're missing those two pieces that make it a holistic picture. And it really looks like broken performance or broken metrics when we don't have that one source. Yeah. So Keith, it seems like we may be underestimating a lot, that there's still this sort of, as mentioned, the in-between, that we're underestimating how valuable these single sources can be. Where do teams really underestimate? I think you mentioned like the in-between, but the friction when using all types of disconnected systems.
I'm going to put it go back to the in-between times, right? Because, if your event is in June and in January, you have all these fragmented systems, fine, right? You have all the time in the world. So you're able to move data from this, data to that, all of this. It's as you're getting closer to the event, that data is not moving. And you can pull in buckets full of good data, but if you can't measure that data because it's across multiple systems, you're going to have bad data coming out, right? And, specifically, if you go back to the marketing system separate from the reg system, those are two things that should move in lockstep, right? Because, and then there are simple other things like when you have multiple systems that all talk to each other, when it gets to that data lake where you have it all at the end, people can measure whatever they want.
Absolutely.
Right? They can go in and the sales team can go in and they can pull great sales data. The event team can go in and pull great registration data. Whatever the heck the C-suite's thinking, because usually they're not, they can go in and they can pull out, whatever nuggets that they think are important, which aren't. but again, that's what happens.
Yeah. And it's interesting because if you think about that lake of data and you think about people who's like, I love this, I think we all have one person on the team who is like, I can't wait to slice and dice that spreadsheet in 17 different ways. But if we don't have it all together, MJ's like, please let me do this. And I'm like, please let someone else do this. I want to tell the story with the data, but I don't know. I'm not the beautiful mind person who can see all the beautiful numbers and things swirling in the air. But Keith, you make such a good point that we may be able to ask questions. And if we have all of it, two different data sets combined together can answer a really good question, like from marketing and sales, like when did we drop emails and when did we see the most uptick in registrations aligned with when marketing messages went out? So we saw the most response to marketing messages that went out on LinkedIn on Monday mornings versus email blasts that, that hit and gives us information on this is where people are getting their information. If they're not doing what we want them to do, let's pivot a little bit. Let's move towards what that could look like. And it's really interesting because I think, we talked about broken performance. All of you talked about, I can't do what I need to do best when we're not in that sort of alignment.
If I can add one small little point, we had a client during COVID, they needed to get their virtual numbers up. So they went out and they found a lot of influencers, right? The influencers were out there spreading the word about this event. Well, because they didn't capture any data on where the registrations were coming from, in the end, no one knew if that actually worked, right? And so you've got to track your data.
No. And it's something as simple as Keith has his coupon code, Debbie has her coupon code, MJ has her coupon code. If you register here, that's something easily measured because you go back to registration data and you see, what code they use and hey, this was a great investment. Yep. Let's do it again. Or, it was a cool thing to try and we learned. I think that's the other point a lot of you have talked about is the knowledge you gain through understanding how these systems work. And whether it's, we talk about pass or fail all the time, but we don't fail in our industry. Either we try, we succeed, or we learn. And giving ourselves permission to use data stacks in a way that can help us learn as much as possible, especially in this time of massive adaptation. We constantly have to be shifting, really being able to find that source of truth. So we're kind of leading into this next section of what changes when we go to these aligned sources of truth. We're talking about friction. We've heard of our fragmentation. We've heard of our broken performance. We've heard of being reactive and not proactive. Debbie, I love that you said that we're information takers, but not strategic doers with that. So if fragmentation creates all of this friction, and I'm sure there's some event planners who are having trauma and PTSD right now with all of our stories, what can change when it becomes aligned? So MJ, from your perspective, because we talked about your moment alone and the real world moment, what does this unified system unlock that fragmented systems can't?
clarity and surprise. I think the biggest, like what you were saying before about what we can learn from the data, it's those moments of like, oh my gosh, now that we understand their buying behavior or really like what their actual challenge is, or you're actually able to have those more meaningful conversations with your sales team around the people that they're interacting with at the event, for example. Like I know we're talking about a B2B event in this example right now, but in that B2B environment, being able to understand who's coming to the booth and getting value from that, not just from the customer's perspective, but your team's perspective, and then actually moving the needle on those things, that's when you are going to have the strategic like alignment with the rest of the company's financial goals. And that's when you can start making those portfolio choices of like, this is a good decision because this is the buyer behavior that we've established from this experience. So now we can actually implement it in these other areas and start making better choices in other events or pull out of other events or whatever that looks like. So I think people actually underestimate what they can learn from an aligned system. I think they really and also the ease. Like if you're, sorry, you can see I'm just like trauma.
This would be so easy if we just did this.
You don't understand how easy your life would be if it would align. But yeah, I think that's the whole thing. Like the ease of making sales when you've unlocked that alignment. I have worked in a team that was so aligned. We made $1 million at that sales event and we built a $3 million business in 2 years, right? Like that is alignment. That is not BS. That is alignment because I was able to have real conversations with our setters and our sales team and our coaches and like the whole process. I was across all of it. But when I'm segmented or when I'm put into a silo and I can't have that reach and I can't have that oversight, you get friction all over the place. So yes, what happens is ease and surprise. That's my 2 cents.
I love that, clarity and surprise. And I like that all of you have used term alignment at some point. And I think if we use the visual behind that, it's, I want everyone who's listening to think about like, if you have all of these systems and they're all over here and none of them are talking to each other, it's like, being in a business that feels fragmented and misaligned. Like, I'm over here planning, but I don't know what marketing is doing. I had an experience once which was something similar. It was like marketing and planning were using different systems, and marketing was over here, systems was over here. And unbeknownst to the planners, they used terminology in the marketing that set different expectations of what the planners had planned. And now everyone who actually does come is having an altered experience. And so your assessment data gets skewed. Like that event didn't work. It's like, well, go backwards. Marketing was using a completely different, outdated sense of what had been designed, and now we're working in a U instead of working in a circle. And I love that you all are sort of using that and giving us that visual. So Debbie, I know you talk a lot about sourcing and engagement and alignment. What improves from a data set from your perspective as a leader in this sort of aligned sourcing space, like when registration, engagement, sourcing, CRM tools align? What do you see improve?
Well, first of all, I think that when they work together well and you have the right tools, it really does align together. Unfortunately, what is happening right now is that we have some companies that are trying their hand at things that they shouldn't and bundling packages. So we're saying a lot of times we have these all-in-one packages, but it is missing sometimes, or the seats, like Michelle talked about, is not being able to buy the seat where this is happening. And I think that it's sometimes cost prohibitive for us as planners and people who want to make sure that we're bringing the right thing to the table, that we are getting aligned products. And I think that, for me, creating something that is genuinely sourcing, I do not get into registration. I do not get into certain items because that is not my wheelhouse. I'm not getting into housing. But you know what I'm doing? I'm finding the right partners that we can integrate our systems. And I think that making sure that you're having the best ones out there all working together where data is shared across the board is our best options out there, instead of having, I know we're talking about one source of truth, but sometimes they are not the source of truth if they are all in one options. And we're getting sold sometimes bad data, that we're not getting what we need out of it. So even though we have systems out there that a lot of people use, it does not mean that they are the best systems. And I think it's finding what works best for your teams, what's easy to use. I don't want to sell people certificates on how to use my product. That is not getting people to where they need to be. I don't need to be certified in my product. What I need to do is be able to go in, use it, integrate to the next step. And I think that's where the misalignment has been.
And what I love is you actually open up a door right now by giving us permission. If you're looking at multiple vendors, you become the source of truth. However, how does your system align with this system that we have in-house? How can you design your output that it will talk to my input desire? And that's a really interesting thing, that even if we need to for cost reasons, legal reasons, I know like in higher ed, we had a lot of proprietary data and it couldn't be shared out. We need to capture certain things, especially when it came to funds and fundraising. Like, but we need your data to talk to our data, and it has to stay protected. So like, you can't have certain things back, but how are we talking to each other? And how can you design, putting it on you, if I'm paying for your product, how can you design the output so that it comes in as a still single source? So Keith, as we're looking at these one sources and looking at tech stacks, and I'm going to ask you a little bit later about multiple systems, but we're kind of getting around to that. You know, where do you see the improvement in terms of speed or visibility, or is it something deeper that you really get when you start to push these systems into a one truth model?
When all of your systems speak to each other well, or at least good, I always see two things that come out of that. Number one is creativity, right? If you're not always worried about data, you can actually look at your event and you can do creative things, right? Because you have more time. The second thing is you can go enjoy your kids' Little League game. So again, you're getting that time back. And I think that's, yeah, you can save a little money by using this system and exporting and doing all of this. But what you lose is more important than money, right? You're losing time. And I think that's one of the greatest things when you finally have systems that all across the board, you can shut your computer lid at night and know that everything's okay. But you can leave it open if the data says it's not okay. And I think that that's one of the greatest things that you get from everything being alive.
Wow. You know, such an interesting and enriching perspective, you know, and MJ, you came to us like, here's a dollars and cents, right? This is real. Like, you know, Debbie, you're giving us this idea of alignment and it can look different. But Keith, like, thank you for bringing in that more human perspective. You know, I think one of the things that a lot of people have been struggling with since we came back from the thing that shall not be named, and we're still adapting to, is that everyone's having to do more with less. And a lot of people have taken on pieces of their role that can feel extensive. It's still one of the most stressful industries, MJ, with the most burnout. You know, we talked about that. Like, it's just, sometimes it can be too much. I think we've all experienced some of that. So the idea that when you have alignment, it can free up the time. This is all here now. I don't have to go to multiple places. I don't have to stay up till midnight reconciling CSV files or not feeling, you know, that's added up and adding to stress and adding to overwork and, you know, dysregulated nervous systems. But the idea that like you can have your time back, like, and we all know that our hour to hour costs money. So if you're not charging for your overtime because you don't get to, it's like this actually has a dollars and cents cost, but a personal cost to your personnel as well.
Yeah, I wanted just to add to that too, because I think Keith just like literally took words out of my mouth. Like I was talking to you guys earlier, that's our mission, our purpose. And if we really do talk about demographics on who are the people in the roles that we are, if you really look at it as a 46-year-old woman, we are right. I'm a little older than that, not much, but I've got 2 kids, a 9-year-old and a 13-year-old. We've got dance competitions. We've got soccer practice. We've got birthdays. We also have parents that are aging. My dad just turned 81. We are these sandwich generations right now that are taking care of everybody, taking care of our clients, taking care of their data, going through, like, we're not going to, I know Keith is not going through this, but going through perimenopause. Like we really, like, I lose my brain half the day. And I really do think that a lot of the times we have to think about that personal aspect of it, where we are, we're in hospitality a lot of times, we're in the people pleasing business, as we all know. Yeah. But a lot of the times we have to please ourselves. We have to make sure that we're taking care of our families. What's the most important to us? And for what Keith just says, that time and money. And sometimes it is a trade-off. Maybe you got to spend more money to have more time. Maybe you got to give more time to, you know, and give more money. There are trade-offs, but understanding what they are and how they all align together make the best processes for people and systems.
Yeah, and you catch mistakes, right? When you have more time and you can think more clearly, you can see things in a different light. Whereas when we're trying to triage everything every minute and you're just plowing through, you know, you miss the easy things that you should have seen. And I don't, prime example that's in the news, right? That accident at LaGuardia, right? The person they were overloaded, overworked, and weren't paying attention to this because they didn't have enough data.
And they were so focused on the, you know, I just have to push this as a push this. It's like there was data that should have precluded, you know, making those choices. And, you know, when you make, you know, choices based on bad data, it's like, well, this is what I had at the time, you know, sadly that has more catastrophic, you know, outcomes than the lighting guy didn't get the updated thing. But I think we feel that.
But an allergy list does matter.
Yeah.
And those are the things that you don't want to miss.
It's such a great segue into the next lens that we're going to take on this, which is the cost of systems. And, you know, all of you have just mentioned the cost that I think is probably one of the biggest ones hiding in our system is time spent. And Debbie, you bring up such a good point, where this time needs to be spent and where mental burden lives and physical capabilities live, that this is where mistakes are probably going to be the most costly. So, MJ, we talked about investing in systems. And I want you to talk about like that hidden cost of investing in them, because you're also the one who said like you can make $3 million with an investment that's aligned. So what is the cost benefit analysis of looking into these systems for alignment, even if on the surface they look like they cost more, but you can sort of advocate for them? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. It kind of comes into Ali's written a question there, and Keith later, I'm sure Devin will bring it back and ask you the question because it is to you. But what's the impact of data silos on the follow-ups in the pipeline? And that's exactly my experience that you're referring to, Devin, is that I feel the cost is like the non-followed up conversation, or like the unknowns. So when you do not have a system that is cohesive, you are not optimizing, because I love optimizing everything. So you're not optimizing what you know. And so by that, you're not optimizing the opportunities that you're getting when you're meeting new people. You're not optimizing the opportunities that you're getting when you're potentially reigniting old customers. Like there's just so much cost involved because the systems are not actually set up to support the team. Or, to Debbie's favorite point, they're not trained on how to use the system to optimize that information to train. Like there's all these different parts to it. And I think what you're talking before about, yes, a $3 million company, I will tell you the funniest thing about that in the tech stack that we used. Okay. That was the first tech stack I ever built. And it was all workflow and automated through Zapier. And I thought it was the clunking out there. I was like, there has to be a better way. Like there has to be a better system. Well, 6 years later, she finds out that system is still better than some of the all-in-one platforms that we see. That system is still better than other CRM tools and or funnel tools and or, use whatever you want. So another question that was in the chat that I saw about, what's the way, like do you move to one platform or just integrate everything you already have? If everything you already have is working and is capturing the information that you need, integrate it, because there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's
absolutely
right? It's like find a tech that is answering the questions you have, integrate it, automate it, train your team on how to use it, and then that creativity and that human side, all those things will start to unlock. So the cost is that not happening.
Absolutely. There are some great questions coming in the chat about how do we do this and how do you get your internal team. So please put those questions in the chat. We're going to get to them in just a moment. And so many of you have been answering the questions that we've prepared. But I think what we're looking at too is where does reconciliation consume the most time? And Keith, I think you were the one to answer this. And Debbie, I'm going to ask you that too, because we're talking about two different types of reconciliation. But we're really talking about like opportunity costs here. We're talking about time costs, and it can have a larger impact. So Keith, like where do you see reconciliation consume the most time?
On fragmented systems, it's Excel is a tool. It shouldn't be a source of truth. And I think that reconciliation, it's just the time it takes to merge all that data and figure out what all that data means, right? I don't know if I can answer that question squarely, right? Because if the systems don't talk, you're left with a jumbled mess that you actually have to figure out, you have to piece together. And there's your time, right? And because there's usually a hard limit on what people are looking for, right? They want that within a week. They want that within X amount of time. The speed kills, right? I think,
absolutely.
What is it? The military has a saying that's slow is fast, fast is slow, right? And so you want to be able to take your time to do that, but you don't have that time. And so you're lumping all this data together. And the one thing in the industry that will remain unmentioned, as you said before, that has helped a lot because people are able to take all this data and dump it into whatever AI tool of choice. But is that data accurate? You don't know, but you're getting it done in the time that you've been allotted to get it done.
Absolutely.
And that's the killer. It's pressure.
Yeah. I think there was a term that says, I need you to hurry, but don't rush.
Yeah, exactly. So,
That's a really interesting thing. It's like, yes, I know there needs to be a little speed behind this, but rushing through that just to take whatever it is without looking at it, dumping it and saying, this is it, again, without oversight, are we asking the right questions? Is this what we want to measure? Yes, absolutely.
I just want to add to that, what Keith is saying. The worst part is that because of the need to have it tomorrow or in a week's time, what happens is the data ends up just sitting there in a bucket and nothing happens with it. Yep. That is my biggest bug. You've got all this amazing data and you're not doing anything with it. And that's when I sit there as the events professional and go, so why did I bother putting that event on? Events are your best key to get to know your customers, your most immersive experience to convert them, and you're going to do nothing with everything you just learned about them over the course of 3 days or whatever that looks like for you. Like that is
because you're only measuring, did they attend, did they spend the money, did we make any, did they register? It's like, okay, what does that tell you about your business? And all the three of you sort of brought this back to an actual dollars and cents comment, which, you know, we're looking at cost. You know, Debbie, I want you to sort of weigh in here on where cost can be shifted, like where value is. So if you need to use an internal system, is it worth it to train your team? And then they have that training, it is a little faster. You know, where do you see these actual financial investments benefiting? Whereas I don't think I want to spend the time, but we need to shift into thinking about events not as a line item, but as an investment in sales. So how can you also help us make the case for, and I know some of these questions were in the chat as well, how can you help us start to make the business case for some of these systems, whether it's external training or you always use the external or you pay to have your team? Can you help us understand the business case and maybe look at the cost with a different lens to have us have some tools to look into doing this?
Yeah, I think that, you know, part of the issue that we are having right now is there is tool fatigue. There's just something out there. But I have talked to several people who are building tools to actually help integrate, create ways for us to show data, create better systems on the front end for the event professional, but they're not being looked at because everyone's investing on the attendee experience apps. I think that is a huge disservice, number one, to the event, to the data that we can collect, to what we can use with it, than just having these apps that are just for the attendees. Are they important? Absolutely. But I do think that having an integrated system that all works across the board really shows the right data. So I do understand from a perspective as working with a client right now is that we are on like 40 different systems. And for me to catch up, I was just brought in a few weeks ago and it's like, you need to use this, and this. And as an independent planner, I'm very used to having to train myself on new tools, but she wants things immediate. It's like, hurry up, but take your time, because there's so much documents and so much that she knows that I have to crawl inside of her brain, crawl through all of the Google documents, crawl through ClickUp, crawl through this, and her understanding. I'm just trying to understand the event. I've never been to this event. I don't know what's important to the event. You know, I'm just sifting through it. And I think that being able to allow people to train and ask questions in an environment that is safe, instead of someone having to walk in and feel like bombarded, overwhelmed. That's where burnout happens. That's where quiet quitting happens. That's where when we are not trained on the systems. And this even goes back to hotels. When I worked in a hotel, like I wasn't allowed to get started until my 2 weeks of Hilton training was up. And I was like, I'm ready to go work for clients. But I was like, you know what? Those 2 weeks of training were the most important thing that I could ever do. And we skip that part this time. We just think everyone knows technology. Everything is different right now. Everything you go on, I might use Nifty and they use ClickUp. They might be the same type of project manager, but they're not the same thing. I wanted to upload all my stuff in because I already had all my tasks. I didn't know how to do that in this certain system. Now I have to go research or find the video. When if I understood the systems before, or time was built in for people to understand how things work, instead of being like, hey, I need this right now, this report. And people are like, I don't know how to run that report. And then again, there's your time. Is that understanding what the needs are up front, understanding what data needs to be extracted, understanding why you're coming in at this point. Like, I'm pretty sure Keith is brought into places where people have like a million things and they're like, make it work. And then they don't want to use it because, oh, that's different and difficult. Like, we need to stop relying on old tools that don't work anymore. And then really how to make things simpler for people to pick up quicker, because we are at a time where we watch 30-second videos and we get bored. When we used to sit around and watch movies, just think about how our brains have changed. We have to meet people where they are in training.
Absolutely. And our attention shifts based on how integrated we are, how interested we are. And I think one of the things that you've all touched on is there are some people who love to do this. And if you look at your team, it's like, okay, you clearly love to do this. I'm going to shift something onto you because it's faster for you. You get it better. You can ask more questions. You can be more creative, versus some of us are like, I'm more personal based. I'm more operations based. I want to be over here, and asking those questions and taking time from a leadership perspective to say, you know what, if we need to bring all of this in, how do we do that? The chat is blowing up with questions. So I really want to shift to start having you all start to answer some of these. And there was a couple of questions that sort of started with, how do we get started? How do we make a business case for this to higher ups? What are small steps we can take to reduce chaos? So all of you have a different perspective about this. And I know my cardinal rules, I don't want to go around the horn, but let's really just look at, from your perspective, where is a good place to take a first step? Where is a good place to start reducing the chaos and making a case for it? So Keith, like Benjay's like, make Keith do it. So Keith, we're gonna start with you. And you can speak to either or both or common mistakes, but I think there's a challenge is like, you've really awakened our audience to, we really need to do this. But sometimes the most daunting thing is getting started. I just want to say before you answer, you came to this webinar because you need to get started. So yay, congrats on taking the first step and even knowledge about it. Congrats to you. But Keith, give us a push down the hill. What do we need to do?
Do an audit. The first thing you need to do is go through every single piece of event technology you use. I don't care if you use a spreadsheet, a pad of paper, write them all down. Then go into each one and look at the features that each one has. Because a lot of times platforms are adding features, but we don't know that because you only use it for registration or whatever it is, and you've been using this other piece. So you can eliminate some friction right off the bat because you're going to find you're going to have overlap. And so you can toss a few things right out just because you can eliminate them. Once you have that audit done, find out if they already integrate with some of the other tools that you have. You might find that there's already an integration built. If there isn't an integration, do they both integrate with something like Zapier, as MJ was talking about? Mm-hmm. Because then you can get them to talk. And the other thing is fast is slow, slow is fast. You don't have to rush. You already have whatever system you have. So go and look at all of those things. That is the absolute best place to start.
Absolutely. So I'm hearing an audit your systems, see what you have, see what they can do, see if there's overlap. Would you also suggest, Keith, this is a follow-up, when you look at your systems, is it worth calling your rep for each of those systems to say, hey, can you walk me through this? Is there anything new? Is there anything I'm missing in terms of functionality that maybe we're paying for and not optimizing?
After the audit, do the audit, and then you can actually, because I would actually say do the audit, then document your process. That's another thing most organizations don't do. They don't have, like, if a new person, like Debbie was saying, she has to go and pick all of this out of someone else's brain. That's difficult. Sit down and map out your process. Once you have, and again, it doesn't have to be anything formal and it doesn't have to take 5 weeks. Just sketch it out. And then that way, when you talk to the rep, the thing, you can know everything you can know, right? Was that Rumsfeld said known unknowns, right? And then hopefully they can fill, your rep can then help you fill in the blanks on all of that.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Thanks, Keith. So MJ, Debbie, real quick, like, do either of you want to talk to like how you got started, a small step, just a little bit of encouragement while, our guests and attendees are really thinking about how to do this and to make it feel less daunting?
One of the things I just wrote down, because I hear it over and over and over, is, but this is the way we've always done it.
Oh my God.
You need to throw that logic out the window, because there was a reason why that prompted you to bring someone like us in, because the system is broken. I think that is realizing that your system is broken, and it even comes before the audit, is understanding what in this process is not working and how do we understand and what are our needs. Like understanding not just the audit portion, because that is ridiculous important, but if you go even a step before that, is why is this broken? Asking the why, go with your who, what, when, why, like all those things that we learned in, first grade, and just knowing what you don't know. I think that's like such an important thing, is knowing what you don't know, asking really important questions to people on your team, people outside of your team, the guy who does the IT or the guy, I just worked with someone who's just like, she does marketing for like event marketing, goes on site, with the trade shows and all of that. And she's like, I'm redoing the same document different ways because certain people need it different ways. And I was like, well, you need an integration tool and you need to go talk to people who do this. And once I told her exactly what she needed, she went to somebody and it got done. It was a full integration. She changes one document, it goes across the whole board, but her not knowing that there's even options out there. So knowing what you don't know and being open to change is kind of, I feel like, the first step. And then going into the audit and then seeing, do different things integrate together where we can get rid of certain ones and bring this over to this one, and making sure those integrations work, because exporting out of a system and importing into a system and all of that is, again, time, making sure that they're actually compatible.
Yeah. And if there's ways to automate it, but I think it also starts to answer the question of like small steps to reduce chaos. And I think you really did just touch on that. Is like taking the time to ask questions. Like, where is this chaotic? Why is it chaotic? What is it not feeding? How is it being reported or not reported? How is leadership responding to this? So really just taking that moment. I will speak to one thing that you said, which is, this is why we've always done it, or this is how we've always done it. It's taken me 20 years to come up with the perfect comeback to that. All right, are you ready? Since the last time you changed it.
Love it. I thought you were going to tell the story about.
Since the last time you changed it.
I thought you were going to tell the story about the
No, it's taken me 20 years in this industry to figure that out. because I guarantee you, if you added a tech stack, if you added a registration tool, you did change something. You adapted to, hey, paper writing ins and sending checks is not how people want to do it. They want to do it online. So we need to set up a credit card system. Great. How do we do that? So you have integrated change the whole time. And I think that's a good way to go back, or even have that conversation of like, this is how we've always done it. It's like, Keith, it goes back to your audit. Well, we changed something at some point. We added 2-3 systems because at some point someone said, this system probably does XYZ thing, without pausing to say, does our current system already do that? Does it have those capabilities?
And a lot of times the changes, like, the credit card thing, a lot of times changes are made under duress. And we need something, to put up on the screen that'll allow people to answer a poll, right? And so you go to Google, right? Because you need immediate help, and you find Slido or Mentimeter, whatever it is, and you start using that. Well, guess what? If you understood the tools you already used, you would realize Platform X already allows you to ask questions and put polls up. But now you've added something else to your tech stack because you had to do it in emergency mode.
Yeah,
absolutely. And that answers Blair, you had some fantastic questions in the chat about, is it better to move to one platform or just integrate? I think you guys have really answered that, biggest challenge with different systems. But MJ, Blair has 2 great questions in the chat that I want to read to you, because I think they're somewhat related. And I think when you talk about the instances that you've had. So first question is, at what point does managing multiple systems stop becoming manageable? And how do you objectively recognize a tipping point? Debbie, I think you touched on that, but MJ, could you give us a little bit more insight?
It's funny, that first question about like, what's the tipping point when they no longer integrate? Because you can't, or when things become too manual. So if you're spending a lot of time doing a manual task because it is not integratable or automatable, that is a tipping point. You're spending far too much time on something that you probably should not be spending that much time on. So to me, that is absolutely when multiple systems become a huge red flag. Is like, why are we spending so much time on this one system or in this one task? And then to the other thing about, does it show up as bad attendee experience?
Serious, yeah.
So you know how like when you have a job interview, people say to you, oh, tell us about an event that failed. In 27+ years of experience, I actually never had an example. I was like, I know that sounds really terrible, but I've never had an example of an event fail because I turn it out. Like, it just happens. There's no such thing as a failing event. I had one. Now, it was not a me thing. I am going to full disclosure it. I am going to push back on to the team. And I think where the data was failing was that there was not a clear objective from the client. There was not a clear who they wanted in the room. And as such, the teams that were responsible to find the attendees, and they only had to find 15 people, found no one. And we ended up with a 20-person event with 4 attendees, of which it was basically the 4 reps. So
that sounds like a great learning experience for a lot of people.
What data shows up.
Right? We don't use the F word, but that sounds like a great learning experience. And thank you for sharing that, because now we're all learning from that experience. There's another great question in the chat. It says, why are more companies suddenly talking about consolidation right now? And MJ, I think you really hit on that. Is that these are not talking to one another. It's all manual now. Keith, you talked about the actual fix and opportunity cost of that. It's like everyone has to do all this manually. If they're doing all this manually, they're spending so much time on that, while also, Debbie, to your point, having to take care of parents, having to take care of kids, and trying to work a 9 to 5, trying to manage things. But if all of this is not automated and it's manual, and then all of you have mentioned manual comes with more mistakes because you're just trying to get it done to have your life back. So I think this idea of consolidation, and why I believe this topic is so popular, is that we're trying to, if we have to do more with less, then what we're doing has to be as streamlined as possible. Working on the business and being successful versus working in the business and just doing the tasks, which aren't really moving it forward. There are some fantastic questions. I realize that we are almost at time, and I want to ask you all sort of one more thing. What do you think if you could wave a magic wand? And this is your lightning round question to all of you, because you've all touched on so many other things that can happen if you could wave a magic wand. What do you think if you could give everyone an integrated system, which might look different to everybody? Like, what do you think would be the most unique benefit? And the reason I'm asking is that I hope everyone who's listening can say, this is what is possible, and it probably aligns with something we want to do. So Debbie, if you could wave a magic wand and create a system for each of your clients, what do you think their number one takeaway would be?
I think making sure we have the right data, and then when we are ready to start on the next event, where we are being very, very integrated. Taking that and getting it into one system that we can actually take that data and say, you know what, the attendees liked this, but they didn't like that, and stop going out of like the CEO wants this or the board member wants this, and really understanding what, digging deep into what hit with people, like everything, and then creating your event from actual data instead of rinsing, repeating every single time. I go from it from the sourcing, but also that data is super important for us to get to the next level to create engagement. If numbers are important to you, like knowing what's important to you is the most kind of important thing for me in order to move forward on creating that next event.
I also love you subtly dropped in the like data allows you to have some CIA with your seniors to say like, that sounds like a great idea, ma'am, sir, person. However, our data doesn't really support that right now. So if this is a budget thing or this will make you happy, fine. But like, we're not going to see that return. And that may be something that you want to consider now versus that particular item. MJ, if you could wave your magic wand, what would you do?
Yeah, I think if you waved your magic wand and had data that was a one source of truth to everyone's questions around like, how do we get teams on board, or like, where do we start? Like, start with cohesion, start with the importance of team cohesion. And that usually will actually come back to a culture of the company. I'm not going to lie. I think I see, people adapting to new technology or even becoming happily accountable to that technology. So I think that's the big one too. I feel that when you have good data that is integrated and is seamless across the silos, all of a sudden accountability happens. And people who are happy to be accountable will embrace that because it helps them also show that they're doing their work and turning out the results and making an impact on the business. People who are happy to hide behind bad data or the lack of accountability will be exposed. So cohesion, if you guys all kind of come in with a point of like, to management sort of saying, look, we need a cohesive approach. We all do need to be on board with this information because as everyone's been saying, you can build your own reports when you have that cohesion, and find those data points that are important to you. So yeah, I think cohesion is probably my big takeaway word from all of that. Like, come from that perspective first, that human perspective, as everyone's been that human perspective, because that's what's going to create integration and alignment or opportunity for integration and alignment. And then the surprise and all that stuff will happen. Yeah.
All right, Keith, bring us home. Thank you, MJ. If you could wave a magic wand, what would you do?
If I could wave,
great value.
Actually, I would go out to the event technology companies themselves. And if I could wave a magic wand, I would have them all have open APIs.
Wow.
Right? Because like, there are so many amazing platforms. There are so many amazing tools, but half the time they're cloaked behind $10,000 API fees and all of this stuff. Whereas then if that would happen, then companies could then build the most amazing tech stack ever.
Wow.
Right. And it would be tailored to their exact needs.
That's fantastic. I cannot thank all of you enough. I just, want to repeat to everyone who's listening kind of the things that I heard from you guys, that fragmentation isn't just slowing our teams down, but it's really limiting our strategy, our ability to be strategic, and sort of, as you said before, being a reactive order taker instead of a proactive strategist, proactive advisor. That a single source of truth isn't necessarily only about technology, but it's about alignment and visibility and impact. And then when our data is unified, that our decisions can get faster, clearer, more accountable, and more creativity. So we can actually be a little more creative, be more adjustment, look at the attendee experience, look at our CEO's expectations, look at how it has an impact, be creative about how it's impacting our bottom line and helping us reach organizational goals, not just as a line item, and really can improve company culture. And I love that all of you mentioned that there's a real human aspect. We're not just talking about data systems, we're talking about impact in company culture, in burnout, in personal experience. So clean, executive, you've all raised your magic wands and given us ideas, and hopefully to everyone listening that you'll be able to take one thing away and implement it, or even just have the pause and have the conversation. Debbie, Keith, MJ, thank you so much for giving us your time and treasure today. We really appreciate you. For everyone listening, please connect with our fantastic panelists on LinkedIn, and thank you to Eventcombo for bringing us another stellar webinar on what's really going to impact our business going forward. Thank you all again. Have a fantastic afternoon, evening, and we'll see you on the next one.